Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming and joining us this morning. I may introduce you to Otobong Nkanga. So great that you're here, and this is an exceptional exhibition you've done for us. Thank you so much. So let's get into the topic. Actually, the building here, the building by Peter Zumthor, has become one piece of art divided into 4 phases, you called them.
Yes, I would first thank you for inviting me to be able to do this exhibition here. And I would also want to thank the whole team and all the collaborators that I've worked with. I think it's good to start with a thank you. With the Kunsthaus Bregenz, the technical teams, the administration, all the people that have worked together to be able to make this exhibition possible. I would also like to thank the Textile Museum, and the team is here, and the master weaver, the person I worked with to make the tapestry.
Please
Steph.
get up.
He's the master weaver. So he's been here we've been working together for the past 10 years. I've been working with the Textile Museum since 2010. And of course, the director, the head of communication, the curator of the Textile Museum is here. I don't know if Martin Rauch is here, but also the team of Martin Rauch, who are based in Schlins, and they have made it possible for the work that you see here and the work upstairs. And there have been also different sponsors that have been able to give us the possibility to do this work. And I think the team of Zumthor are here with the light. We have from the Vorarlberg region, which is quite rich in its craftsmanship, in different things. And so I just want to thank everybody. I hope I haven't forgotten anyone here. And of course,
we have to thank you.
And my husband.
Who is doing the media coverage.
Yes. And also to Peter Zumthor, because the building is amazing. And for an artist to be invited to a space like this and to have the privilege to have the whole building to oneself, which is a very rare thing to have. I mean, you exhibit in many places in the world, but this is quite an incredible opportunity to be able to make a work on 4 floors, 4 phases. And I think when you have such opportunities, you actually grab it by the bull's horn. So that's what I did.
What is the horn of the building? So is it the material? Is it the light? Is it the atmosphere?
I think we cannot separate everything. I think when Peter Zumthor was thinking about the building, he really considered the notion of light, and I think that's why you have the glass. But he also considered the way the light falls on a certain kind of tone, and that tone is the concrete walls. I got to understand that the concrete walls are actually rammed. So it's not the same way of making concrete, but it's the same way that Martin Rauch works with earth by ramming the earth and slowly compressing it. So you can imagine the building has that same kind of texture.
And it's not polished.
No.
Yeah.
It's not. So since it's not polished, the light falls on it and there is a certain kind of softness within it. But at the same time, there's something very masculine about it. And I think he thought about all these different aspects, the softness and the hardness of the building, and to play with those 2 elements.
But material coming from the earth is one of the most important aspects in your body of work. What's the difference between cement and soil?
I'm going to go into details. Well, cement, let's say, it's a composite of different materials coming from the earth. And those composites could be, for example, vanadium, could be, different kinds of materials that are then put together, and when you put them together, if you add water to them, they become solid. But they all come from the earth. It's not different. It's just that the material concrete, once the composite has been mixed together, it gets really hot. It becomes another composite that doesn't allow for water to go through it. It blocks. That's why it's used for construction. That's why it's used for building things. But it's extremely hard, solid, and you can actually build foundations with it. But earth, in that way, when you work with earth, it's not something you mix with. You can mix it with other composite, but the way Martin Rauch works is to really work with just the earth material, which at the end of the day, you can put it back into the landscape, and it does not affect the landscape. It's not something that changes its composition. It stays the same way as it is, just that the only thing is that it's ramped down, or it's used as an adobe or as rammed material, but you can still work with it.
And it dries slowly, and that's what we are seeing here, and you're showing us.
Yeah, here we're having different kinds of elements working together. It's still the earth, but when you're looking at this work, for example, you have the color schlum, the schlum.
Schlemme, Schlick.
Schlemme, Schlicke. So I've learned a bit of
They are nice in a phonetic sense, these words.
Schlum.
Because you already feel it on your tongue, like the substance of these words.
Yes, the schlum. You already understand it. But it's actually the taking out of the clay part, the loam of the earth, and that's what creates that kind of liquid form. So you mix that with water, and you can actually have more liquid or thicker kinds of loamy, or let's say clay liquid. But at the same time, you would have, on the other side, we have pigments of earth, the red pigments, the yellow pigments. So you start seeing different colors and composites of what the earth is made of. And here we break it down in different ways of showing what the capacity of the material earth or soil can do.
But it's also nicely done. So you have like this containment, and it's a circular form. It reflects evidently the light situation. And then there's another very important element.
The tree.
The tree.
Yeah, the way of thinking of the exhibition, or to create the work on the ground floor, was to think of something that is that talks about life, but at the same time things or indications that actually show life, like plants, things like that, are not around it. But it talks about something that is slowly evolving, that is slowly drying up over time. And the tree stuck in it is almost like a continuity of that kind of life form, but at the same time the tree is slowly dying. We don't see it, but over time it becomes apparent when a tree is dead, but you don't see it dying. But there are certain kinds of indications that would allow us to know that this tree is in the process of dying. And here, there's almost like the tree being suffocated by the soil, in a way. But at the same time, it's the tree that gets its nutrients from the soil. I don't know if I answered the question.
No, you did. And one of the signs that the tree actually is in the process of dying is on floor second.
Yes.
Maybe you can tell this sign, because I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was talking to Hubert. Oh, I forgot to thank Hubert.
Hubert Steinhauser.
Hubert Steinhauser.
Who was the owner, or is the owner of the forest where the tree comes from Krumbach in Bregenzer Wald.
Yes, so I forgot to thank him. So Hubert was the one that chose this tree. So during our discussions, I talked about I wanted a tree that was as tall as the building, and he chose this tree because the tree was already in the process of dying. So he explained that actually how you know that a tree is dying is when you see that the mistletoe starts eating, comes on the tree and really digs itself into the tree, and slowly starts eating into the tree and suffocating the tree. So once you start seeing that the mistletoe has really stuck on, then you know that this tree is slowly going to die. But this tree is about 100 years old, and this tree, he said, was a wild tree. So it wasn't one that was planted in his forest, but it's one that actually grew there, and it wasn't in the right position anyway. So there were new trees coming out, and this tree was blocking the light for all the other trees to be able to grow better. So when we look on the second floor or even on the first floor, you see that the tree has quite a lot of branches, like 5 branches that stick out at every ring. So you can imagine how majestic the tree actually looked. But one of the things I was worried about was like, okay, if you take out something from a place, what does it mean to be able to extract things from a specific area? And what hole does it occupy in that space? And that's one thing I'm always kind of thinking about, especially when I visited mines and different sites like in Namibia, or where you come from a region from Nigeria where you see oil spills in the Delta region, or you live in Belgium where you also see certain industries that have shut down, and what it means as a whole within a place, what it means as that relationship to economy, relationship to livelihoods, relationship to even the possibility of having just a normal life, a breathable life. And so with that, you think, okay, if you take a tree out of a region like here, what does that mean to all the other trees? What does that mean to that ecosystem? And so I'm always thinking of how do you balance out somehow. So we planted 4 trees to 1 tree. Hopefully, it will continue life in a different way. But this time you choose where you plant it. And we planted the tree in Grunbach, not at the same place, but close to it.
And the idea of infiltration or penetration of one thing into another, that was the mistletoes to the tree, is an idea that appears also in the tapestry, but they're done by human beings or by machinery invented by human beings.
Yes. Where do I start?
I think they are so attractive, and the first thing what you think when you are looking at them, they are so beautiful. Maybe you start with that, with the colors.
Well, I think the way of working, I was invited by the Textile Museum to inaugurate the new machine that they acquired in 2020. And this new machine, was it 2020? This new, I don't know when, 2020. Anyway, the new machine it's from the Donier, which is not far from here. They're based in Lindau. And for me to be able to inaugurate this machine, I thought maybe it would be a great idea to be able to collaborate with Kunsthaus Bregenz and Textile Museum. And this is a machine that could weave a tapestry of 3.50 meters high. And most of the other machines they have weave at 1.65 meters. So I had to find a way of making a tapestry that would work, since I'm not used to that scale with the machine. And I worked with Steph, so I started drawing the work already since 2020. It's been a year and a half I've been working on this project. But the idea of colors, we used 12 yarns here, and we could make up to 140 colors out of 12 yarns. this was the first time that I really tried to push the materiality of the work and also to work with different kinds of weaves with the tapestry. The idea was to be able to make one work that would actually be cut into 4 parts. So what you see here is the first part of the drawing or of the tapestry, but if you put all 4 together, they would actually fit perfectly. And the line that you see, the orange line, is the line that connects the whole thing all the way to the top. But the way of thinking about the tapestry was to be able to think, can one make something that is connected to underneath the sea, the things that are not visible, the things that are not tangible, to the places that or the land that we stand on. So it's really looking at the deep sea, the abyss, the midnight zone, the twilight zone, and the sunlight. And these are the terminologies that are used within ways of talking about the different levels of the sea. But I was interested in that idea of extractions of energy, but also the death, and the death that gives life to energy or gives life to elements that we constantly are using and as a kind of cycle. So when you look at the hands, the fallen hands or the lost hands, I call them, they are kind of I'm thinking a lot about the way human beings have moved across sea, but also beings that have been lost at the sea. And also when we think of, for example, coming from the African continent, our story is very much linked to Europe, is very much linked to America, is very much linked to the histories of labor and intense labor. So when we think of plantations, when we think of the energy and the amount of people that were transported from one continent into another, and the amounts that were lost at sea over 400 and something centuries, then we can imagine what have this energy, these bodies, the human beings, what have they contributed to the sea? So the fish, the animals, or the things, the seaweeds, the corals, they have fed also from the human bodies that have been in the sea. But at the same time, if we imagine ourselves as minerals, we imagine ourselves as water, we imagine ourselves as having calcium, magnesium, iron, all the minerals that allow us to function. And without those minerals, we cannot function as human beings. How does that translate at the bottom of the sea? So the abyss kind of talks about the fallen hands, the fallen bodies, the fallen labor that then the energy shifts from those minerals into minerals that we're now extracting to be able to make our cars work. And the future of energy is coming from the sea for our batteries, because we've extracted so much from land that we know that the sea has so much minerals in them that we're going to be using that for the energies in the future. So I was interested in that correlation of the organic matter bodies shifting, transforming into other kinds of energies that we're using. So it's a full cycle.
And when we go into the next floor, then you see the white structure here.
Yes.
And it first looks like a net, but basically it's something different. It's
Yeah, the way of doing the whole understanding of just what that sea is about, the stories, mythological stories from the cobalt to cobalt, the kobold, the Germanic story about.
It's a little funny, nice ghost, so to speak.
Yes, ghost.
House ghost.
That stays in the sea or stays in wood or gives shipwrecks and creates havoc. But at the same time, it's the same name that is used for
the
cobalt.
Chemical element, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because people confuse that with like arsenic or, the poisonous thing that comes out of extracting of minerals. So there are many stories I was looking at, but I was also looking at the ways that we are mapping the sea. So the lines that you would see there are it's not a net, but it's mainly the mapping of the baseline of the sea. And it's the same kind of grid lines that you'll see as a net. But there's specific elements that come into the tapestry, like the jellyfish, which is a sign of warning in relation to the sea heating up and the changing of the environment of the sea. So the more the sea becomes warmer, the more jellyfishes we'll be having. So there are all these different elements that are coming in as ways of coding or putting in certain elements that are referring to changes. Economical change or ecological changes, even though they might look quite like normal, but actually they can be accelerated or they can be multiplied, or they can come even higher to the surface due to the streams that are shifting and changing in the sea. And we also see that as we go up in the tapestry. And I think during this time, this year, which was very much, we realized also that relationship to labor and the relationship that comes with the loss of the gesture of making and doing, and the economy that has shifted. There's so many things that I was thinking about during the process of making this tapestry, but also thinking about places that are warming up in the world, places that are flooding, and I was wondering what were this correlation between the deep sea and the forest, and how a lot of places in the world we see there's a much more acceleration of burning forests, burning lands, and so with that, in this tapestry, you then have the hands on the third floor, and the hands on the third floor starts talking about the loss of labor, or the loss of livelihood. And when we start thinking of, let's say, a whole forest burns, or I had friends in Greece because I stayed in Athens for some time when I was doing my project in Documenta. And a lot of my friends were saying, oh my God, a lot of us have lost our livelihood due to the forest, due to the fires. And so the hands fall, in a way. The relationship of the hand in action becomes a hand in action, not in action. And so the drawing, you see these hands that are lying on the ground, by the seaside. And it kind of talks about when that livelihood is totally taken away, totally gone, and what happens next.
And you replace the human body by fragments of it, yes, by parts of it. They are important for you, as you said, because they are gestures, they are performative. So basically it's only hands, nothing else. It's mainly, no torso, no legs, no heads.
No, I think sometimes I just imagine that the hands, but when we're actually making machineries, when we're making things that are meant to replace the human being in what it does. Like when I was looking at all these histories about mining, at first, people will dig a hole. People will carve out what you need, the mineral you need. If you needed copper, if you needed zinc, you would dig it out and take it out. So the hand is the first information, or the first, the first...
Is it the means of our cognitive abilities? Because a lot about your work is also about knowledge.
It's about knowledge, but it's also about learning through the making. And a lot of the things that we do is related to our hands. And our hands becomes a very important part of the development of our technologies. And so once the hands become obsolete, and the hands become more and more obsolete, the machine takes over, and even the automated machine does the same thing as the hand. So the hand is the first way of understanding how the machine would work, how it should articulate, how it should move. And from there, you're able to like start creating things that clamp, that dig, that move, that release, that, you know. And so for me, it's to separate the part of, is to focus, let's say, particularly on gesture and on the performativity of the body, or the performance of the hands. And for me, that performance of the hands is directly linked to labor, is directly linked to automation, is directly linked to,
To the future as well, right?
Yeah, totally, yeah.
So to invention and
Yes.
science and research.
Yes. So I reduce it to that. I take off the torso, because the torso for me, if I'm then thinking about, let's say, a gesture of motherly for a woman, or of birth, then the torso might have something to do with that. Or
So it's also a container.
it's a container. Yeah, this part for me is a container. This part is a part of making. Then the legs or different parts of the body starts having different kinds of connotation. Once they are together, then they start making different kinds of narrative. The head for me is not necessary, because I don't really care that much about the head.
Yeah,
it could be the brain.
You
it could be
cannot
all
use
that,
it as a means.
No, I can't. It's more used to be, for me, it's used as a way to demarcate people and to create like differences, because your nose is bigger than mine, your lips are bigger than mine, your head. Okay, and the brain is hidden, so you can't, it's underneath the head. So most times I just cut that off, because it's too much of an indicator of race, of this, of many things. Meanwhile, the gesture is universal. So it's a way of like going to the point in which where we all do this, and it's much easier to talk about that than to start going into other directions.
There's another element in floor 1 and 2, which is important. Actually, these are 2 elements. There's ropes,
Yes,
and glass balls, little cells with plants.
yes. While making this work and thinking about this tree that cuts through the whole building, I wanted that each floor will be a kind of indicator for the next. And so by the time you get to the top floor, everything comes. It's almost like aha moment, like, oh yes, now, you know. But the way of thinking about it was to constantly have that reference to something that is giving life and something that is dying. So if we think of the tree itself, as we go up, we see that it has more and more moss or lichens and all these other little life forms that attach to this tree to continue living. So even if something is dying, we see it. Even on a concrete material, you see life forms that are attaching to them and that are continuing to give life or to have life. So I'm interested in that kind of dichotomy of like this world in which we constantly are not looking at the part where even if something is shifting its state, that something else is bringing life to it. So the way of thinking of it was a tree dying slowly, but at the same time, the rods are almost like an umbilical cord that connects to something else that is having life, and that is the beginning of a new life, and that is continuing life no matter what is happening. So we talk about, for example, plastics. Let's go to plastics. We say, okay, this plastic, it will take 10 years for it to decompose, or 100 years. But we're not counting backwards. So we're looking at it like this plastic is already in the process of shifting its state and regenerating, or regenerating in a way that, what I mean regenerating is that it is breaking down to get to a point that it will, let's say, be no more in that state of being, and that it would be less and less at a certain time. So as something is poisoning and creating toxicity, at the same time that thing is regenerating. So we forget the part of looking at it that in 10 years there's a countdown to that 10 years, as at the same time there is a count for it to, or we're counting that is actually polluting or creating toxicity. I was looking at, for example, the early mines in Cornwall, and that was early or late 19th century, early 20th century. And one of the most amazing things is that if you do not know that that space is toxic, you would think that it's one of the most beautiful places in the world because the colors are just amazing. But at the same time, we're still 100 years waiting for that landscape. It's more than 100 years, waiting for that landscape to regenerate. So the thing of regeneration can take 1,000 years, 100 years, but we're still in that countdown of regeneration, as at the same time toxicity is being visible. I don't know if I'm making sense. Yeah, okay. So for me, I'm always trying to think, or I'm interested in that way of not thinking of something at just the end of it, that we are here now. Our life is with such a short time, within the time of elements that are constantly regenerating, dying, and also evolving. And so my way of like thinking of the work or the bubble is that kind of world, to create a small world that is in that process of regenerating. And the funny thing, on the first floor, when I planted the first tree close to the tree that was taken out, I found a really cute baby tree, which was less than a year, of the same tree, in which I took and put in my glass ball, in which later on I'll put it back in the landscape. But for now, during the exhibition, I take it as a loan, and I will return it back. But it was amazing that the landscape revealed to me a baby tree, a baby pine tree, which I've never seen one, and this is the first time I'm finding a little baby pine tree that is less than a year.
You consider the entire building also as a kind of a geological structure, because you can consider the different floors also as a kind of layers of sediments. And on the top floor, it becomes present.
Yes.
There's no artwork anymore.
No.
It's a kind of how would you call it? An environment, a situation.
I think it's multiple things. I feel that language has a way of reducing our imaginary somehow, sometimes. That, and in some language, there are things that you're able to expand, like in French, you could talk about l'écume, and that's a very specific word that comes with like the foam.
Gischt. We have a very nice word in German as well. Again, Gischt.
Gischt, yeah. And in English, I can't find the word. And I think in English, I think in Ibibio, in my language, and sometimes the words do not allow for the form or the kind of imaginary I have, because we can say that it's all of the above. It is a landscape, it is an environment, it is an emotion, it is a thinking process, it is a place of contemplation, it is a future, it is a present, it is a past, it is multiple landscapes that I've encountered in different places, condensed together in one world. It is so many things that I cannot find a word for it. An artwork, I think it's too reductive to be able to talk about it. But it is coming from a place that is deeply emotional. It is coming from a place that can be the future. It is coming from a place that is the future, it is the past of certain places. It is coming from a place of hope and of failures. So there are many things that, and in that I cannot find the word. There was one word I invented at one point in time for my work called fragilologist predicament. And the fragilology, which is a kind of like to be able to study the idea of fragility.
And decomposing and decaying and...
Yeah, fragility.
Fragility, okay.
Fragility, but because I couldn't find a study of fragility. Is there anything that can we study fragility? And fragility in all sense, not just ecological, but in all sense. And if we have that study of fragility or the science of fragility, what does it bring in as notion of care, as notion of understanding of the world? So it's not about just thinking of a material, but thinking of a certain kind of state or psychological, emotional state. And so I never find words sometimes for the feelings or the emotions or the material and the combination of things that have another way of existing. But if I think of the building, I think of it as a strata, as almost like you would look at different levels, and if you slice through a stone, sometimes you look at a stone and it has different layers, almost like a geological compression of time. So even if I'm looking at the glass, I do not look at the glass. I'm looking at it as silicate. When I go to Dubai or I go to Shanghai and I look at the tallest building in the world, then I'm imagining the multiple holes that have allowed for that building to be 600 feet or whatever, height it is, because it cannot be there. It's almost like a kind of mathematical equation, calculation, that the things you build is taken out from somewhere else. And that hole is the same as what you're having up here. And that I understood that by visiting mines, and when you look at mines, you see that the holes, the levels, was almost like a skyscraper upside down. Or when you look at an anthill, and an anthill, the termiten, with like the anthill, and you imagine that everything the ants have pulled up to create this anthill is the same equation of what has been taken out from the ground. So for me, these kinds of things are interesting, that you enter into a building and you're looking at it in its intensity or in quantity of things, and you're imagining where the glass, how, the labor, the energy. There's so many things you think about in a building that is not just the architectural structure, but it's just about the movements of goods, it's about the holes, it's about, just so many things.
Zumthor loves the idea of having considered his own building as a kind of a garden. And with the idea of the garden, there's flourishing, there's flowers, there's peace even. Mm-hmm. And when we are entering your space, it's a bare landscape. There's no flourishing anymore.
There is flourishing.
Yeah, that's true.
There
Small, tiny flowers incorporated in a large tapestry.
Yes, but there's flourishing everywhere as there is death. They're intertwined. There are things that we're not seeing that are flourishing. There are little bacteria that are flourishing. There are things that are not visible to our eyes. There are things that we are not sensitive to. But I believe that even when we're looking at something that we think is dead, there is something flourishing. But it's not to our understanding. It's on another level that we cannot capture. And for some people they can, and for some they can't. But I think there's a constant flourishing amidst death.
Wonderful.
I mean, even Peter Zumthor, he creates this building, and we give it life as artists. We are constantly creating things within it.
But also as living
exist.
beings.
Yeah.
Because we when we enter it, we bring in also temperature, or something we don't realize.
That we don't realize, that we don't see. A bit of our skin is being, we don't see the microparticles that we drop. And I feel like with the COVID situation, it created a certain kind of heightened sense of the things that we're not seeing, the elements that we're sharing with each other, the air that we're breathing, that we are sharing.
And that we exhale the toxic materials we exhale.
We exhale and the toxic materials we take in. But we're also giving life to other people, and that life is also creating death. Because the virus is something that is alive, right? But it's the same thing that is also killing us. So it's a very strange kind of correlation of sharing life, sharing a certain kind of life to people, but that life that we're sharing is the same thing that is suffocating us, that is killing us, that is also eating our lungs, that is paralyzing us. So it's a very strange way of thinking of the world in this thing of that there are many life forms that are living parallel to us, but those life forms might not be giving life to us. Those life forms might be giving life to other life forms, but some life forms might be so powerful and so invisible and non-tangible that they can actually cause havoc to human beings. But it doesn't mean that those life forms might not give other kinds of life to other things. It's just that we believe that we are the center. And so because we believe we are the center, we have a certain kind of relationship to other life forms in which we suppress, we behave in a way that allows them to either expand, allows them to multiply, and allows them to mutate in different ways. But they're all, it's flourishing in different ways.
And actually, the space will dry out. There's still some humidity into the small ponds and in the area on the floor.
Yes.
But the idea is that it will dry out.
Yes, the top floor, the way of thinking of the top floor, which is the sunlight zone, was to be able to bring that notion of light, but also that feeling of heat, but something that is in progress. So the earth, the rammed earth gets lighter. Everything will get lighter. Everything will get cracked, dried out. And it was to actually have a very a connection to that relationship of water. And I remember when I made the piece in the Emirates, that was the title of the work was called Aging Ruins, Only to Recall the Chisel of the Past. That work was really looking at a landscape, especially in the Emirates, that had changed. A lot of the water is being taken out from the sea, so the more you're taking out water, the more you're creating more salt, so desalination. But there were a lot of wells that people would dig into the water table, deep down, to be able to take out fresh water. And a lot of the wells had become very salty. So we're seeing that we'll have a lot more water, but the thing is the fresh water becomes a bit less. So it's that relationship of thinking about, we see a lot of water, but at the same time, the thing, like when walking through a desert, or that you have an oasis and you have a dry land, that there are pockets of possibility of water, possibility to drink. But that is also something that is not given. It's something that over time will shift. So the way of thinking of the work was to be able to bring all these different elements that are essential elements for our livelihoods, for us to exist, for us to flourish. But at the same time, these are the same things that could have toxicity in them, could dry out, could become brine, could become, dried out. So it's not,
I had the opportunity to see this piece in Sharjah, and it made an enormous impression on me. It was outside, it was not indoors. And it was a little garden surrounded by walls, quite similar to the feeling of being here in the Zumthor building, but with the difference that you had the sky.
The sky, yeah.
And the sky would mirror and the little ponds.
Oh, yeah.
And there was a real palm tree,
Yes.
and very old one, even
Yes.
more than 100, I would guess.
Yes, very old, yeah.
And would bend over. Yeah, it was wonderful. So,
Yeah, the tree there was a palm tree that was dead. It was the only one of the trees there, and they cut the hair of the tree, so it looked like Mireille Mathieu's hairstyle. So you have to bring in Mireille Mathieu, which was a kind of bob. It had a bob. So the first time I went to this tree or entered that space, I was amazed because the only thing that was drawing me in the space was the tree. And so that's how this work started growing, because the space had a 9-channel sound piece, and I made a sound piece for the tree. So the tree started talking about how it died. But it did not die because of the sun or anything. It died because of its roots being addicted to salt water. And by drinking that, it slowly kind of became a dead tree. But at the same time, she was calling out to the kids and telling them, please, please call the rain. So the more rain we have, the water will get less salty, and I will get maybe better. But she didn't realize she was dead. So it was a way of like creating a voice for the tree, or creating a voice for the elements in the landscape. Yeah.
and our tree here, the top of it is burned.
Yes.
It's black.
Yes.
And it's a peak. It's a needle, like this one. Mm-hmm. And it's the other end almost.
Yeah. Well, some things have happened through intuition, and some things have happened through thoughts that I had. But I think being able to see the work in space, there are new thoughts that are happening, because you imagine things, but when you have it live and real, then you start seeing the correlation between the machine, which I call the line that takes out the mineral, and then you start seeing the top of the tree, which is burnt. So one is in the process of taking out, not bothering about the future, not bothering about, it's like I take and I do whatever I need to do, I take out from here, I take out from there. But I think it's that kind of correlation, or that kind of connection, that that by taking out and not thinking of how you replace, how you take care, you're not thinking of other life forms that are flourishing around there, that it can reach to a point of a slow death, of burning, of something disappearing, that will not be part of our history in the next 100 years or something like that. And so, yeah. Now, just thinking, if you had all these trees that were gone in this area, like on the mountains, what would it look like? That's sad, right? And what that means to the people working in Grunbach, in Doren, the woodworkers, the craftsmanship, the knowledge of making. When I went through Doren or Grunbach, you see the houses that are built with this wood pieces. You realize the histories that have been passed on by generation to next generation. And then they become like hyper craftsmen, to be able to make things at a speed, at a certain quality, and that has been years and years of transmission, and also that relationship to the local landscape. And so when you think of, let's say, a place where everything becomes toxic, polluted, that relationship to economy, of transmission of knowledge to the next generation and the next generation, that there is no break in how you can invent and how you can make. And so for centuries, you could become an amazing local place that can spread its knowledge to the world. And once that is truncated, either through wars, either through ecological shifts, or either through colonialism, or whatever it is, then you realize that it's a gift that we actually have certain things that we can still do that our ancestors were able to do, and we can do them even better. And that transmission is something that is not valuable, that is beyond value. It's beyond money. It's beyond anything. So for me, the thought of having on the last floor a tree that is burnt is like thinking about not only the tree itself, but what that element or that part does to a whole ecology, a whole knowledge system of a place. And that for me, it's an understanding from coming from a place like from Nigeria, or coming from a place within the African continent, or even being in Brazil, or different parts of the world. And then seeing also in Europe, when I live in Belgium, so when you look at certain economies or certain knowledges that were in certain places, what that locality gave, and then you see industries that are empty. You see buildings that are falling apart due to a shift of economy, due to a shift of knowledge, due to new technologies coming in. Then you question a lot how our futures are going to be. And our futures are not only a singular future from a place. Our futures are so entangled with each other that when you realize, also with the COVID situation, it heightened a lot more this notion of entanglements of places, the subterranean connections of economies, of emotions, of all kinds of things that were connected. Then you really think about it in the sense of how do you transmit that, or how do you put that in the work?
Otobong, thank you so much for these inspiring thoughts, and we all have to deal with it now.
I'm sorry. But just remember that things are still flourishing, things are still growing, no matter what, that things will continue, but they might continue differently.
Thank you so much, and thank you also to the audience for listening to you. But this was absolutely great, exceptional. Thank you.